I was having a meeting with the president of the Madeira government because of other stuff, non-related. But the opportunity arose to speak about this. And when I had the opportunity to do something, suddenly I had this network of people that I could rely on to help me. And they did. And that was the game changer, because I couldn't ever have done it by myself at the time.
Hello and welcome to Bitcoin with Jake. This is a podcast all about people's personal journeys to Bitcoin. I wanted to know more about the people converging on this new form of money. Why do they see value in it? What skills enable their understanding? How is it changing their lives? If you're a founder looking for funding or an investor looking to make investments, then please reach out as I develop my network in the space. Do me a favor and chuck us a 5-star rating on whichever app you're using to listen, or a like if you're watching it somewhere. As insignificant as this may seem, they help a startup project like this hugely. Lastly, if you have any questions at all, please just reach out. The easiest place to find me is on Twitter at Jake E.S. Woodhouse. Now, I'd like to take a quick moment to talk about our sponsor. Fastbitcoins are a Bitcoin exchange who you should definitely take a look at next time you're thinking of making a Bitcoin purchase. They're a great team, which for me is always the key to due diligence, whilst their product has a ton of features useful to every Bitcoiner. Check out my episodes with Danny Brewster, the founder CEO, and Nathan Smith, the chief compliance officer, to learn more about the people behind the brand. Thank you to Fastbitcoins for sponsoring the show. Now, on to today's episode. I'm speaking with Andre Loja. Welcome, Andre. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for the invite.
No, my pleasure. And I can't wait to hear your story. So this is a Bitcoin podcast, and I want to hear about your journey to Bitcoin. And selfishly, I'm very interested in what's going on in Madeira and what you've started there. So we'll get to that later in the conversation. First off, when did you come across Bitcoin and why was it interesting to you? Perhaps you didn't like it initially, and then something happened in your life and you saw it a different way later along the line. Teach me a bit about how Bitcoin became part of your life.
Well, I don't know if I even remember correctly. I know that when I was still single on my bachelor's life in my single apartment, I messed around with Bitcoin a long time ago. I even downloaded Bitcoin Core and all that thing, but at the time I dismissed it, and this is just too hard. I don't want to understand it, and then so missed opportunity there. But few years later, I guess I came in as most people do, number go up, crypto is going up, it's the future, whatever. And I did a lot of bullshit. I didn't understand Bitcoin, of course. I think I only bought Bitcoin at the time to trade for other stuff. I fell into the shitcoin narrative, as most people do. I thought Ethereum was something amazing, the world's computer narrative, all that bullshit. Bought some ICOs, all those things. And of course, bear markets does wonders, and especially to the curious people. As I used to say, Bitcoin is almost like gravity for curious people. And those who really take the time and effort to dig deeper eventually come out the other side as maxis. And that was exactly my journey. Especially, and I must add the fact, it hasn't been a long time since nobody deeply understands it, but as much as I can. I think it was only after COVID that it really struck me. I'm a doer. I have several companies here in Madeira and a big family. And, COVID, Madeira is a very touristic place, and I own one of my businesses is a vacation rental management business. And during COVID, when they closed it, in one day, my whole company went to zero.
Wow.
So as you can imagine, that was a big, big scare at the time, right? And in the midst of all that fog and confusedness and even afraid by my family and my sustainability, let's put it that way, it made me even dig deeper on what the solution could be. And that was when I think I finally understood how powerful Bitcoin was and how it was all about Bitcoin and not the rest. And the rest was just a big distraction. And eventually, Bitcoin is a virus. And I decided that, of course, along all my other stuff. But I decided I really wanted to make a difference in the area.
Awesome. And so much of that resonates with the journey I've been on as well. And I've now recorded about 50 of these conversations, and the outcome's very similar, but everyone comes from a different place. So wind the clock back to your bachelor's degree. And you mentioned you downloaded Bitcoin Core. Like, did you have an interest in technology from a young age? What were you studying at university? What introduced you to it that at the time you were like, okay, I'm following a different path? You obviously went in a different direction.
Well, just to clear it up, I'm a college dropout. I didn't finish my degree. I went to Lisbon as a lot of modern people go to university there. But at the time, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just chose one. I was a good student, so I didn't have a problem choosing whatever I wanted. The problem is I didn't know what I wanted at the time. I just basically chose a degree to go to Lisbon and party and have my own life in Lisbon with friends and so on. And university at the time was in the back of the head, just as a this thing I have to do to be here, right? I guess. I eventually realized a few years later that the course I was in, it was civil engineering. It was nothing that I wanted to do. And I decided to drop it, and I went to audio visuals. So I became a video editor and then a director. And I started in a small company, but then I eventually, it was acquired by a bigger company that did a lot of sports broadcasts all over the world. And it was an amazing journey at the time. I got to visit a lot of places, especially Middle East and Africa, and it opened my eyes to a lot of stuff, which was really good. But in the end, I really wanted to make stuff for my own. I was always very curious. I am not tech oriented at all, but I was very curious. So I was online a lot of the times, checking the trends and what was new and so on. That was, I think, the time when I stumbled with Bitcoin. Because I'm not tech oriented, I downloaded the software into it. It was weird at the time. I didn't know what to do exactly with it. And I didn't put the proof of work at the time, I guess. So I just dismissed it and eventually found it, a few years later.
Yeah, because none of us necessarily knew what you'd come into contact with. There's the surface level interaction when you first stumble across Bitcoin. There's lots of different ways people end up there, but more often than not, one doesn't necessarily understand straight away the value proposition and why it's important. So let's get to that. That's a nice segue. So you've obviously been on this journey. You've run a few different businesses of your own, or you've at least been involved in other businesses, and you came across, I'm assuming, the kind of the crypto space 2016, 17, which had the nice big bull run, and the shitcoin casinos were very much part of that run, and ICOs with this new way of raising finance for startups, etc. And it was all very exciting, but as you mentioned, a huge distraction. So what was it that made you realize it was a distraction? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was only after COVID.
Okay.
I was already reading and listening to some things, but it I don't know, it never, I wasn't really there. It took that really frightening moment where the world stopped, and I was afraid for me and my family, honestly, for our quality of life. Let's put it like that. And I think it was only in that moment that I really dug even deeper. And and there were some conversations, and that's the Bitcoin community is amazing. As you know, there's so much content out there. There's even more nowadays. But I actually relate to the Michael Saylor story. He tells the same. Like, he dismissed Bitcoin at the time, and then it was only after COVID when he saw all the printing and realized that this stockpile of cash was a melting ice cube, as he puts it.
Yeah.
That he eventually realized how Bitcoin was powerful, and I think everybody understands it under its own perspective. Let's put it like this. Because I'm a businessman, that related a lot to myself and my savings and the business and ventures and so on. I even remember a conversation he had. I think this was on the first time MicroStrategy did this business meeting online, when he had this conversation with Ross Stevens at the time.
Yep.
That was really powerful for me.
Yeah, it was a MicroStrategy for corporates. I remember now.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So that was a few months after COVID. I don't remember exactly. Maybe already in 2021. I'm not sure. I was already in the process, and that was I guess, the final nail in the coffin,
Mm.
where I really, really got it. I remember that one specifically, and yeah, from then on, I just,
Down you go.
you cannot take it out of your mind, right?
You can't. No, you're right. And it's, I mean, incredibly influential guy Michael's been, and I've also, heavily studied a lot of what he's, said about it. And, overnight, suddenly $400 million of this stock listed company's balance sheet's gone into Bitcoin. Like, what? Like, the amount of lawyers, the amount of accountants, the amount of shareholders that are affected by that decision. That's some of the best due diligence you could ever possibly imagine when it comes to looking at making an allocation to Bitcoin. Like, if they're able to do it, then you can as well. Does that make sense? So I've also been hugely influenced by that, and it helped to legitimize Bitcoin in a lot of ways. It's like, oh my God, you can actually hold this stuff on the balance sheet of a stock listed company. Like, I really need to look more closely at this. So what was it in terms of the characteristics of Bitcoin that you saw as beneficial to your businesses? You've already mentioned that you had a holiday rental management business in Madeira that obviously got shut down because the tourist industry overnight was completely collapsed. Did you have some other businesses that were affected? Can you teach me about those? And what does Bitcoin represent to you then as an entrepreneur and businessman?
Well, first of all, the savings itself, right? That just all those teachings, and especially not related to Bitcoin, but before even being a businessman, I understood that I didn't know shit about money. And that's the biggest learning that you get when you really start going through the journey, right? How much you don't know about how the economy works and how money works, and the first principle transfer of value between people and businesses, and how much you don't realize about money at all. You don't even think about it. You're born into this fiat world, and you think that's how things have to work or are supposed to work. And going through the journey of Bitcoin, it taught me a lot about that. So it was not only Bitcoin, it was the power of sound money and how not sound fiat money was. And of course, then you realize that Bitcoin's properties are the soundest money there can be. And you try to fight or do your best to come into that world and take advantage of that for you, for your family, for the world eventually. And yeah, and a business related, the savings of the business, like the cushion that you want to make it as safe as you can and for the future. Even my personal savings, my family savings, so that's the first direct observation. And then, after COVID, Madeira also, there was this big program to attract nomads and remote workers and so on. And you start realizing how many of these young people already use Bitcoin for their travelings around the world, of course, because it's the best, it's the most portable and fungible money there is. You start, figuring out ways where you can introduce that into your businesses as well. I own a vacation rental management, but I also have a co-working space in Funchal that is full of foreigners. So I got direct connections with their ideas and how they use Bitcoin as well. Well, some of them also use other cryptos, but they're just in different parts of the journey, I guess, the learning journey. Yeah, I eventually started accepting Bitcoin as well in all my businesses. And curiously, I already have a lot, especially at co-work, I already got a lot of payments in Bitcoin.
Wow. Yeah, how cool. And so I enjoy hearing about people's kind of different lenses on the world. And so I'm sitting here now and thinking about the fact that part of your due diligence and gaining faith in Bitcoin was actually looking at your businesses, seeing how they could benefit from it, looking at your personal savings technologies that you were, using and thinking about what that meant. But then equally, like, what do your customers say? Go and talk to them. What are they thinking? And suddenly people are paying you in Bitcoin. You're like, oh my God, I should really learn more about this. Why is this the case? As a small, well, I don't know how big your businesses are, but let's say small to medium-sized businesses, you've got a bunch of red tape likely in order to run those companies effectively. Has adopting Bitcoin onto the balance sheet, taking it from transactions, has that been a difficult process? And any challenges or things you might want to share to any business owners out there listening?
Well, I had an advantage because I don't know if you're aware, but up until now, there is no tax on crypto gains in Portugal.
Okay.
So there was no real problem in accepting Bitcoin for payments because it was a de facto legal tender. Although there's a proposal in the budget to change that now. But up until now, there was no issues whatsoever in accepting payments. Of course, there were problems with accounting, because the softwares are not prepared to account for an asset like Bitcoin. So we had to be creative in a way, in a compliant way, but we have to be creative on the way that we did accounting. I remember my accountant wanted, he was not happy with this decision. Like it was a bit confused. And
That's funny.
but everything turned out okay. And now we're actually waiting to see what comes out of the next budget to see how we can integrate it even better. And it's all new, and lots of things needs to change for it to be properly accounted on businesses and whatnot. But it will get there eventually.
Yeah. So the lack of a capital gain on crypto is a huge kind of tick in the first instance that makes it easier to adopt it as a business. It's like, I'm originally from the UK, but now based in Australia, and both countries still charge you for any gains made on crypto, which makes it incredibly difficult from a transaction perspective as a small business to actually accept it for payments and send it anywhere else and try to actually document that and account for it. It's really hard. But one of the things that, we're seeing play out is this whole idea of jurisdictional arbitrage and different places you can live. And now you can own Bitcoin and you don't have to have any physical assets, and you can be a digital nomad and go and sit in Fujal and run whatever business you want. So I'm extremely interested, to be honest, as I'm building this podcast out, adopting Bitcoin as fast as I can. I'm very mobile. I've got 2 small kids, but providing I can find somewhere nice for them to live, then in theory we can go anywhere. So let's segue to that.
Welcome to Madeira anytime.
Well, and no, I'm really, really interested to ask you, because I interviewed Rob Brinded recently, who is based in Madeira, and Rob was telling me about.
Friend of mine.
Yeah, he was really, really so positive about the place, and I'm like, well, where am I going to base my family? And I live in Melbourne. The COVID restrictions here were extraordinarily harsh for what it turned out to be. So very open to thinking about where I might move to. So I have to confess, I listened to you on a podcast with Daniel Prince recently and Jeff Booth. And the conversation was around you sending a DM to Jeff about Madeira and what was going on there. So let's talk about that. I'd love to learn more about, you're a businessman, you're based in Madeira. That's obviously where you grew up and a place that you love. What's the relationship between Madeira and Portugal itself? And why is that potentially interesting from a Bitcoin perspective? And what did you reach out for help from Jeff with?
Well, the story is not quite like that. The DM was even more interesting because I'm just a plug from Madeira, as I always was. And there was a time not so far away that I even thought I was the only Bitcoiner in Madeira. I'm so glad for Bitcoin Twitter in that way.
Yeah, it's a very good place for meeting people, isn't it? Yeah, because you think that no one else is going to agree with how I think, or all these different conversations that you're having online and listening to people, and podcasts very personal. You're right in someone's ear, and you're like, this is so amazing. Why is no one else talking about this? But they're not, right?
They're not. And it eventually turned out not to be like that. And there are many Bitcoiners around, but
cool.
We'll get to that, I guess. But so I was, really, really deep at that time, reading everything that I could and listening to the most podcasts that I could and so on. And I was always bothered. That was the start of it all, like these small decisions that change your life. I was in Lisbon and went to this really big bookstore. And of course, I was searching for Bitcoin books. The only thing I wanted to read at the time. And, I never found anything interesting. And I remember when I was just leaving the bookstore, I saw those, top 10 books of the week or the month or whatever. And in number 8, it was a book about crypto, really outdated, really bad. And it was number 8 in sales. And it got me thinking, like, Jesus Christ, like they're selling this awful book. There's clearly interest because it's on the top sales and people are just being misinformed. It's terrible. And then light bulb, I need to do something about it.
Awesome.
And I think all Bitcoiners at a point decide they want to get involved somehow. And I said to myself that this is my opportunity. There is no good Portuguese literature on Bitcoin only. So that's when I decided. I had already read Jeff's book, The Price of Tomorrow, and I loved it.
Brilliant,
So I
wasn't it?
said,
Yeah.
this is the way. I'm gonna start translating. There are so many books already in other languages, so I'm gonna start translating the books. I'm gonna start a publisher,
Okay.
and so I did.
Wicked.
That's where Jeff's DM come into play. Like I didn't know anyone, right? So I just
Yep.
sent him a random cold DM on
Yep.
Twitter,
Yeah.
and Jeff, being the amazing guy that he is, replied, and we eventually agreed. We signed a contract, and I started my publishing company.
Wow.
And because Jeff, and that the rest was easier because Jeff was such a heavyweight and so respected in the industry that when I reached out to other people, other authors,
Mhm.
I eventually said I'm starting this, publishing company in Portugal. I'm translating books to Portuguese. My first book is The Price of Tomorrow. So yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah, yes, we'll go. And
Wow.
and then I get Vijay's book. I got, Thank God for Bitcoin. It's
Yep.
written by 8 people, including Britlove and whatnot. I eventually translated the Gigi's book as well, 21 Lessons.
Yep.
We're just finishing the Knut van Olm trilogy.
Yep.
I got the rights to the Sovereign Individual. That was something special.
Yep.
We're going to be the first translation ever, or the second. I think they already did one in Spanish or something, of the Sovereign Individual. So it started this whole publishing company
Wow.
in Portuguese literature. And now we have all these books all over Portugal in all the bookstores.
Brilliant.
It's good content, Bitcoin only literature with really, really good content.
And what I love about that is, well, first of all, entrepreneurs who see opportunities and they act on it. So you described yourself as a doer as a part of the conversation earlier. And so seeing that in action is just brilliant. Like none of us know what's going to happen tomorrow, but the mindset that some people have, it creates opportunities for them. And you wouldn't be, neither of us would be having this conversation if we didn't have similar mindset in that sense. So congratulations, that's fantastic. Good hustle. And what intrigues me is how many people do you expect to potentially learn about Bitcoin as a result of these translations? And I asked that with the context of I interviewed a guy called Master Guantai, who's based in Nairobi, and he's translating English Bitcoin literature into different African languages. And he's expecting to see, there's potentially a couple 100 million more people that can now read this content as a result.
Yeah.
Now, Portuguese probably not as popular as that in terms of a language, but do you have any idea how many more people might now be able to access this content because of starting your publishing business?
Honestly, no idea at all.
No, okay.
I didn't even start these businesses. Of course, you want to make a sustainable businesses and then be on the green, as Americans say. But I didn't start the Bitcoin publishing company for profits. It was just something I wanted to do, really. Well, the collateral damage on that was much more powerful, but we can because that DM and the relationship I started with some people in the Bitcoin space changed everything. But I wasn't thinking about that at the time. I just wanted to do something cool, something in the space. I wanted to help out. I don't even know if I'm ever going to be making money on this. Portugal is a very small country. Although I was a bit smart at the time and I already secured for all of the Portuguese speaking countries. So I have the rights to Brazil, Angola, Mozambique as well. And Brazil is a much bigger market.
Much bigger.
Know.
That's what I had in mind, right? I was thinking, how many people speak Portuguese globally? So I wasn't thinking at it from a perspective of book sales. I was thinking at it from more, how many more people globally can now understand Bitcoin do you see what I mean? So not necessarily as a business pitch, but more just, it intrigues me as to how this kind of decentralized movement is happening in different parts of the world. And as people realize Bitcoin's really important, they see opportunities to help other people understand it. And that to me is also like a huge way of gaining more conviction in it, because initially you're like, what is this thing? Like, I've got all my savings, I've worked so hard for them, or I've been, got these assets I want to look after, but like, you can't lose them. Do you know what I mean? Like, don't put your money into something that's going to get lost. Like, that's a terrible idea. But hearing stories like this for me are just part of the due diligence process. It just helps you understand, like, wow, this really is like the real deal.
Yeah. Well, but I don't have a number on it. I know there's tens of millions of Portuguese-speaking people around the world, and the farthest we can go and the farthest we can help, the better. But I don't have a number, honestly.
Brilliant. No, that's awesome.
It was just, it wasn't that thought out. I just wanted to make something cool, wanted to make good translations, have good content on bookstores. I was pissed off by seeing those shitcoin books in the top sales, and I had to do something about it. And that was it, basically.
Awesome, as I said. Awesome. So you touched on just now the DM you sent to Jeff, and then some of the friends that you've made through this process that's actually had a much wider knock-on effect. So teach me a bit more about what's been some of the ramifications of opening yourself up to this community of people. And I imagine it's going to lead us to a discussion about what's happening in Madeira.
Yeah, exactly. So what that gave me, and I didn't even realize it at the time, was that by certain senses of life, when the opportunity arose, I was having a meeting with the president of the Madeira government because of other stuff, non-related. But the opportunity arose to speak about this, and when I had the opportunity to do something, that suddenly I had this network of people that I could rely on to help me, and they did. And that was the game changer, because I couldn't ever have done it by myself at the time. And we can get to that if you want, the start
Please
of it all.
tell me about how it all happened. So you had a dialogue with the president of Madeira, and you obviously then reached out to the Bitcoin community saying, "I've got this potential conversation," or "I'm, how do I teach them about Bitcoin?" Like, yeah, tell me the story.
So it all started when the president was visiting my co-working space.
Okay.
And he was visiting not related to this. He was just doing an official visit to a space that was, being frequented and used by a lot of the nomads and remote workers that the government did this whole but after COVID. And we were having this conversation. He checked out all the space, and he was really excited about all the movement there. And then we eventually started talking about other stuff. And that was when the opportunity arose. So the president was speaking how important it was for the future of Madeira to start supporting all these entrepreneurs and the young people and the startups, and stop relying so much on tourism as the basis of the whole Madeira ecosystem and economy. And of course, I agree. So I own a co-working space for 8 years, and I was already shouting at the winds for a long time on how great Madeira was as a overall quality of life place to base you and your family and your businesses. So I eventually took that opportunity, and I said, maybe I can help as well. If you're open to supporting new technology developments, maybe I can help, but you must be open to accept that. And I pointed at the Bitcoin accepted here sign. And that was when he started talking, yeah, crypto is the future. We see all these young guys using crypto. We need to support it and so on. But then there was all these fireworks in my head, because this whole thing of Portugal being tax-free was also not good for Portugal in a way, because it attracted a lot of shitcoinery. We were invaded for the last years with a lot of crypto projects, crypto people that came to Portugal basically because it was tax-free and nothing else. And I was seeing a lot of bad stuff around me. So I took that opportunity as a way to try and make a difference on the eyes of government, because they weren't really there. They were just seeing crypto, they weren't understanding the whole ecosystem, as a way to really separate Bitcoin from the rest on their eyes. And that was when eventually he agreed on digging deeper. And that was when I reached out to other people to help me. So the first guy I reached out was Daniel Prince. And it was basically like sending him a message saying, Daniel, I got the interest of the president, and we got this opportunity to make a difference. I need your help.
Yeah.
Basically.
Awesome.
And as the amazing guy he is, the first answer was just, let's fucking go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we eventually got in touch with Alan Farrington and Samson.
Mm-hmm.
And we tried to get Samson here for a meeting with the president. But at the time, it was not possible because of agendas. And I got another idea. I reached out to Daniel and said, Daniel, what about we take the president to Miami? Because this was just like, I don't know, 2 months before Bitcoin Miami 22.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy idea, but who knows? Actually, one of the things that I've been most surprised lately is the craziest ideas were the ones that worked out the most. But that's a different conversation.
Awesome.
Of course, Daniel, again, let's fucking go version 2.0. He started reaching out to other people And we eventually got Jeff Boots involved as well and other people. We had a Zoom call with the president and Samson and Jeff. And we eventually convinced them to go to Miami.
Wow.
And so we did. And well, the rest is history, as they say. We
Awesome.
had this amazing journey. The deepest guys got involved. They all had conversations with the president. We were invited to Michael Saylor's villa. We had breakfast with them. We got conversations with Jeff, with Preston, with Safety, with all of these guys.
Wow.
And it worked.
Brilliant. It's so cool. And so perhaps it's useful at this stage to understand a bit more about Madeira itself. So in terms of being part of the European Union, in terms of being part of Portugal, like what relationships are in place there that make it possible to take a more aggressive stance when it comes to like how you manage the situation with, international businesses being based in Madeira or people who want to come and live there and work there using Bitcoin. So you've already mentioned there's no capital gains tax on crypto for now. That's possibly being reviewed by the Portuguese government. But can the president of Madeira, make rules of his own that enable the landscape of Madeira to be more attractive to people from an international perspective? Like, how does that work?
Well, Madeira is considered an outermost region of Europe. So we are an isolated island off the coast of, actually, we're closer to Africa than the mainland.
Mm-hmm.
We are very near the Canary Islands, another archipelago from Spain. So we are a semi-autonomous region of Portugal.
Mm-hmm.
That means we have our own government, our own parliament, but we are limited in the scope of our powers. Let's put it like that. So we can decide on a lot of stuff, but we are limited in others, like, our defense, for example, and tax, and, even budget. We manage our own budget, but there are some limitations and some stuff we need to comply. So we are not totally independent on our decisions. But there's still a degree of things that we can manage on our own. Unfortunately, tax, for example, this draft proposal that they are studying now, if the mainland goes forward with it, Madeira needs to comply.
Okay.
We only have a few powers on the difference of the tax that we can apply. Let's say we can, for example, we have nowadays a difference of 30% on the tax that we charge here on the island compared to mainland Portugal, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But we can influence, but we cannot decide directly. Mm-hmm. But we can lobby, and there's some power to the initiatives of the president within the Portuguese government. But even if this, let me explain it the other way. We are not doing this as a government entity, okay? Mm-hmm. Although we have support from the government, we are doing this as a private entity. Actually, we decided to do it as a non-profit initiative. And the whole idea is to increase Bitcoin adoption, but from a bottoms-up way. We don't want to impose anything on the citizens. We actually want the free market to decide by itself. We just want to increase awareness, increase education, present it as a choice that people and businesses can use for their lives. Mm-hmm. And also because Bitcoin touches so many things, and we want to introduce the technology in the network as, how can I put it? As a viable alternative for some of the ways that we conduct businesses nowadays. And I'm going to give one specific example that is very dear to my heart. So Madeira is a very immigrant island. For decades, there were a lot of Madeirans that went to other parts of the world to make a living. Mm-hmm. And we have this very specific large community in Venezuela, for example. Mm-hmm. And just for you to understand the impact, we are in Madeira, we are currently 280,000 inhabitants. Mm-hmm. And in Venezuela, if you count second and third generation Madeira people there, it's estimated to be between 1.2 and 1.4 million people.
Wow.
And we all know how Venezuela did for the past decade and or so, how the situation is there. And there's a big, large community of immigrants that came back to Madeira and also their families. We really want to introduce the Bitcoin network as a way for them to remit values from Venezuela to Madeira and vice versa. without going through the fiat rails and the black markets and all the pain that they have
Western Union bullshit. Yeah.
Exactly. And they don't use it because of lack of knowledge only.
Yeah.
So this is really interesting from the government view as well. Although again, we are doing on the private side, and we'll teach people on how to use the network on the private side. The government will not be involved, but of course, they are interested because it's of value to the community as a whole.
Yeah.
And so that's a big plus, and one thing that I really want to push forward as fast as I can. And there's also another myriad of factors like mining, for example. We are an island, so the whole power grid is isolated. There is a public power company that manages the grids on the island, and because we are a Portugal region and part of the EU, there are these, call it valuable or not, but there are these goals of renewables, 2030 goals and 2050 goals about not depending as much on fossil fuels and coal, and start getting a lot more renewables on the energy mix and so on. And for us, as an island, as an isolated grid, it makes a lot of sense to introduce mining to help with these goals and to increase the renewables effectiveness. So that's another area that we are working with. We are very fortunate to have a lot of people on our advisory board that are really well knowledgeable, especially Troy Cross, that is working a lot in the area and is now helping us to define a strategy and we are doing this big study on all the grid and the flows in the grid and how can Bitcoin be introduced.
So complicated, the energy market, isn't it? Wow.
It is. And Madeira is actually could be quite a test bed for such initiatives, because being isolated in the middle of the ocean is the perfect setup, let's put it like that, to really study and make Bitcoin mining be as effective as it can be to help increase the renewable share. And there's also many other options on the table, like waste management and anaerobic digestion. So many stuff that Bitcoin mining can help.
It's incredible, isn't it? And so Bitcoin is this, it's such a deep subject, isn't it? It just touches so many areas where you start to see opportunities, how it could improve how things are done. One person to mention that I've interviewed before, Nathaniel Harmon, has a OTEC startup based in Hawaii. Have you chatted with Nate?
Not yet, but Troy did. He knows him very well. We actually
mentioned an island like Madeira is exactly the kind of place he's looking at doing projects. Yeah.
I know, but actually, and Troy you should invite Troy for a talk as well.
Yeah, no, I will.
Amazing guy, a great friend nowadays.
I tried already, actually. He said he was a bit podcasted out at the time, so I'll revisit it.
I can imagine. This is full of stuff in his life. And he can explain better all that stuff, because again, I'm not a technical guy. I understood it in a very high level only. But we actually mentioned that. I remember in June when we did bring all guys here, the advisory board to Madeira, it was one of the things that I mentioned to Troy. But there are actually some situations. He said the seas around Madeira, or at least very close to shore, are not really the best for OTEC.
Okay.
And he explained me why. I don't have all the technicalities to give you.
No, that's all right.
But he said that not that far, it's something that we can look into. Maybe we will. I don't know. There's a lot of work to do, and that's just one of the possibilities.
Awesome. Well, part of what I'm hoping to do with this podcast is obviously make lots of friends and help introduce friends to friends. So as you've already explained so beautifully, you reach out to one person, you gain value from them in some way, or you deliver value to them, and then suddenly you've tapped into this network of people all around the world that are willing to share their skills to help develop what Bitcoin's been applied to in different ways. So yeah, no worries. I'll follow up with Troy in the new year. So about 10 minutes or so still to go, Andre, and I always keep it to about an hour. You mentioned at the start that you have a big family. I'd love to talk that through, and we touched briefly on this offline beforehand. So I've got 2 young girls at home now. Life in Australia has not been easy. I've been here 3 years now. My wife's Aussie, but the lockdowns were very, very strict. The medical requirements to move anywhere were very, very strict. I've fallen deep down the rabbit hole of Bitcoin in that time and have made significant changes to how I store my wealth, and that makes me hyper mobile if I need to be. So I'm still very much considering, like, where should I base my young family? Like, freedom is right at the top of the list as, critical factors in terms of getting in and around wherever I want to live. But then equally the ability to build businesses, to invest in businesses, to not have to pay taxes on Bitcoin would be like a huge gain versus where I'm currently sat. So yeah, what would family life be like in Madeira? And the other
Well,
Bitcoiners that are out there that are considering moving, like, Rob was a great example. He absolutely loves it, and it's not something I would, I wouldn't be against it at all. Yeah. So
yeah.
teach me a bit about like what life's more like as a family there.
Well, first of all, I'm biased, right? So let's put that on the let's put that on the weights, right, on the balance. But I'm completely biased. Remember I told you earlier that I was fortunate to travel a lot in my previous job. And there was something really, really deep learning about traveling the way I did at the time, especially to those how do we call it, less developed countries, as we Westerners like to call, which is a lot of nonsense as well when you really go there and start digging deeper. It made me realize one thing. Every time I came back, I was struck by how fortunate we Madeirans were, honestly, because Madeira is a paradise. It definitely is. And this is not about Bitcoin. This is just about the highland as a whole, right? We have some things going against us, in my perspective. Like, for example, being part of the EU would be one of them.
Yeah.
Although most people think otherwise.
Well, that would be my
Um,
my main concern, would be within the grips of the European Union. If I was to move to
exactly.
Madeira, I'm like, is that really, like, long term? Is that going to be the right call? I don't know.
Well, long
Sorry,
term,
sorry to cut you
it
off, but
is because,
I basically, I agree with you completely. I'm very concerned
yeah,
with what might be decided for me by that organization in the next 10 years.
exactly. Exactly. I would put that as a con. So pros and cons. I would
Sure.
put that as a con. Although it's also a pro in a way, but we'll get into that. So we are not independent. We cannot decide our own fate. But in the long term, I actually think the opposite. I think the EU is not going to last that long. So
No, I
in
agree.
the in the long term, I think we're good again because it
Okay.
will eventually
Yeah. Sorry. Good
be.
point. Is it will break up at some stage? So long term, who
It
cares?
will. So I think long term, it's actually going to be good again because it will be all independent countries again.
Yeah.
And on the short term, we may have some issues, but I think if we do get the community here going, we can defend ourselves in all sorts of ways. But that's maybe to another deeper conversation.
Mm.
Um, Madeira as a whole it's an amazing place. We are very fortunate to be in a geographic location that it's called the island of eternal spring for a reason.
Hmm.
Like, the weather is amazing all year round. The weather variation is almost non-existent. Like, this is small shirt is what I use in winter time,
Yeah.
in Fochal, and in summer I just use the shirt
Of
that I
course.
have below. So it's almost, of course, if you go up the mountain, it will be colder and so on. But in your life in the city,
Yeah. It's
it's
beautiful.
amazing.
Yeah. Weather makes such a
Today,
difference.
I'm just looking out the window. It's beautiful blue skies and the light that Rob probably mentioned.
Rob mentioned that it's a really interesting metric about
Yes.
why to move somewhere that I hadn't heard anyone describe before. That actually is a very valuable thing to consider.
Yeah. And there's like this weather thing is actually not random. It's been studied. There are other people that studied the best locations in the world, weather-wise,
Mhm.
and they eventually end up, I think, in 2 or 3 locations around the world that have this most stable and wonderful weather. And one of them is always Madeira.
Mhm.
And there's New Zealand as well.
Mhm.
But New Zealand is on the other side of the world. And well, as you know, the restrictions on COVID were also really
Crazy.
fantastic there. So I would say that compared to ours was a playground compared to
Mhm.
theirs. I mean, the COVID restrictions and all the bullshit that went around that. So the weather is amazing. We have nature, we have mountains, we have sea, and it's not that small that it's like a really remote island where you can't find anything. That's not true. We have medium-sized city that you have
Mhm.
culture, you have restaurants, you have things to do, you have
Mhm.
international schools, the infrastructure is amazing. Digital infrastructure is amazing as well. We are fortunate to have a lot of data cables that run through Madeira, so Wi-Fi connectivity and data connectivity is amazing. So it's actually a perfect storm that makes this island unique in a worldwide perspective. And
And it's a
many
couple of hours into
Bitcoiners,
like,
and
a couple of hours to London, a couple of hours to Paris, a couple of hours to most of Western Europe.
direct flights to all over Europe,
Yeah.
even the United States nowadays, direct flights to
Really,
New
you can
York,
go
for
straight
example.
over. Okay. Yeah, my aunt and uncle actually have just been on holiday from the UK to Madeira.
Yeah, we were a very touristic island since ever. We get
Yeah.
over 2 million tourists a year here.
Mhm.
So there are many flights coming over. Connectivity is not a problem. The shipping industry is quite well developed. Of course, we are an island, everything comes from abroad and so on. That can be a pain as well. If something really breaks, it can be rather problematic, I guess,
Of
but we
course.
never had, I don't think that's going to be an issue, hopefully. It never was historically, even during wars and world wars and stuff like that. Water is plentiful. It's just an amazing place to be.
It
People
sounds
are
brilliant.
nice. Everybody speaks English.
And now you have this kind of decentralized movement of Bitcoiners that are all aware of these, basically the breakdown of fiat currency, the debt that these large governments are under, the ability for them to just shut your business down overnight. And what Bitcoin brings is obviously an antidote to that, which is brilliant because it gives us all some respite and some sense of like, okay, there is some hope for the future, but also the ability to go wherever we want. And shout out to the sponsor of my show, Fast Bitcoins, and they're all based in the Isle of Man. Now, I have an Australian wife that likes the beach. The idea of going to live in the Isle of Man is like I would never be able to persuade her to do that. But potentially Madeira is a different ballgame because it's nice and hot, and it strikes me they're very similar actually in that sense. Like if you're going to set up a Bitcoin focused business, Madeira, Isle of Man. Malta, I guess, is another one in Europe. There's a few different places that you can actually set up, and there are more, let's say, the rules are more favorable in terms of how you can operate as business owners, which is also what I'm thinking about. So, right, we've got to build a whole load of applications on top of Bitcoin over the next 10 years. There's going to be angel investment opportunities. There's going to be the ability to work with other people, actually operating businesses themselves. You've got to do it from somewhere. A lot of it will be digital, and it's very, very exciting.
That's actually I forgot to mention that one of the big things that we want to push forward is the Bitcoin Commons. So we'll have a building here in Madeira where we'll place all the community, basically.
Cool.
We are still in the first talks, but everything's set to go with Matt Odell and Parker Lewis.
Oh, cool.
We are replicating their efforts in Austin International.
Yeah.
We'll have a co-working space dedicated just for Bitcoin companies. They can, incorporate and put the physical address at the building. And we are working already with another entrepreneur from the Netherlands that is coming to live in Madeira. We are developing this Bitcoin Academy, coding academy, that will develop on the side. And we are working also with other people that want to develop international and coding schools here for kids. So we really we want to make it a small paradise for Bitcoin companies and for a Bitcoin community to flourish.
Yeah, I'm like, get me there.
We're still in the beginning of all this process, but the plans are there, the intentions are there, and people are already coming. So this is happening.
Well, and such is the nature of network effects, and anyone that's ever studied them in any way will understand that, if I wanted to go and live and work with like-minded people that are working on Bitcoin, as soon as there's like 4 or 5 of them in a corner somewhere, you might as well go and join those 4 or 5 people rather than start a new corner. Does that make sense? So it just happens to be that this beautiful organic process that you've told me your journey through this conversation, Madeira might well be like one of the really kind of important places to go and visit as this technology gets built out. That's very exciting. Well, Andre, listen, an hour has flown by, so thank you so much for your time today. Where can people reach out and get in touch?
So we have our web page set out. It's freemadeira.com. We are also on Twitter at freemadeira.org. And you can reach out to me directly at Andre Loja. It's my name on Twitter. And please reach out, send a message, send an email, send a DM. If you want to know more, reach out and we'll try our best to help you.
Brilliant. Well, Andre, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Jake.
Okay, friends, nice work. You made it all the way to the end of the episode. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this conversation. As I said at the start, if you have any questions, then please don't hesitate to reach out. And if you enjoyed the episode, then please rate, like, subscribe, and share. That's it for now. Enjoy the rest of your day. All the best, Jake.